So thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Liz Homan, and I'm the chair of water. And Steve Sasso is my co-chair on the water committee. We're actually water, sewer, and public utilities, but water seems to be a main focus for the last couple of years. Not saying that sewer is not important, but this has taken up a lot of our time. And we don't do it alone on what is technically defined as the water committee. We have our mayor, Ari Bernstein, Ron Kistner, our director of operations, Alyssa Mayer, our water collector, but also our CFO, Mike Vreeland, who is our borough engineer. He works with Van Cleef Engineering, and Lane Simon, who is on the DPW. He is a licensed water resource for us, and he is also an excellent historian on Allendale Water, so has really been helpful in many aspects. This evening, our goals are to share information on how to make sure other people can access this information. So if this is your first time and there's some references I make to previous presentations, that you'll know exactly where they are. And also you can encourage your neighbors, your friends, anybody that's in Allendale to go and check out those previous recordings. Also, we'll talk, I'll share some updates and the timeline on the request for bids for the sale of the Allendale water system. And at the end, I'll give a Q&A of some of the questions that were sent to me. Originally, I'd hoped to post them, but it's very hard to post definitive answers to questions. And when I give you the Q&A, you'll see, how it is a little bit challenging to put down something onto paper. Why do we want to have these meetings? This is the same slide that I share each time, but I think it's so important. But we're having these meetings because Allendale Water and all New Jersey systems, and quite honestly, the United States drinking water system as a whole, are facing challenges in the future. It's very important to all of us on the Borough Council that we are transparent and that we continue to communicate with all residents. And we want to make sure that we continue the conversation on the value of our drinking water. I hope everyone talks about drinking water at least once a week with somebody about how we can preserve our water, how we can make better decisions as consumers, and also how we can encourage there to be efforts made to improve our infrastructure and continue to try to treat contaminants that enter into our water supply. I want to make sure that everybody understands that myself, Steve, and the entire Borough Council, as well as the mayor, takes our role with water very seriously and encourages you that we want to hear your thoughts. Ultimately, as we talk about the RFB, the request for bids for the water system, that if there is something that fiscally is a viable option, the voters will decide. So it's really important that people get information, get their questions answered, and talk about this. And there is a lot of information. Tonight will be one of the shorter meetings, I believe, since it's really much more of an update. But please, again, encourage people to review the previous virtual drinking water presentations, and please follow up by email. We can set up a time to talk. So with that, I'll move into a little screenshot of the Allendale website, which is allendale.nj.gov. And if you go to the home page and you then go across to departments and you click on departments, there's a drop-down menu that you can select water department, and that is where you will find the first Allendale Community Water meeting, second and the third, and also what I had promised previously, and we certainly can add to it. But this is a list of water acronyms that sometimes I may use in the presentations and might forget to say what it is. And if you want more information or there's one that's not there, you can contact me. But, I put them in alphabetical order just because that seems smart, but like PFOA, what exactly is that chemical? PFAS, these are the whole category of these emerging contaminants that have been in the news. MCL, maximum contaminant limit. So it's just important that people have some sort of a reference. So I wanted to make sure that was there. And after tonight, we'll have a fourth Allendale community water meeting. link. So this just lists what's there. This talks about the first meeting is about the basics of the Allendale drinking water system, all of the components that we own, how they're set up. The second one goes into the contaminants and also talks about the economics of our water system and kind of how we run. The third one is dives a little bit deeper into talking about what are the future options for Allendale drinking water. And here is just a little reminder of what they are. Oh, sorry. And, it's whether we retain the ownership through the operations and management, if we sell the system, and then the third one being the something else. And I'd like to just give you an update on each of those options. As far as retaining the ownership of the Allendale water system, we do continue to work on ensuring obviously the system is up to date. I have Suez contact me each and every time we have testing and send a actual email that says we are in compliance with all regulatory limits, and we are, but also we are continuing to explore the opportunity for what we would need to be doing for the PFAS treatment facility that is proposed to be built down at the New Street water treatment plant. And we are also working on identifying the funding options through the New Jersey iBank. Alyssa Mayer has attended and been in several contacts with the iBank to see about funding opportunities through them, so that if that comes to fruition, that we can do that in the most fiscally responsible manner. The selling of the water system is the update on the request for bid, which I'll go into in the next slide. And then the third one really comes down to, at this point, saying, what type of shared services would we have? Could we merge with another, local water utility? Can we better share services? And right now, during the 6 weeks of the RFB being out, on the streets, we really can't be making any additional headway. We have talked with Ridgewood Water, Waldwick Water. I've had communications talking with Ramsey, but because there's the opportunity that even Ridgewood Water could, put in a bid for our system, we can't be communicating with them about that during this 6-week period. So that's a little bit on hold, but not to worry. We will jump right back into seeing, what those options might be. The RFB, so the second option of the request for bid, we did release the RFB on April 6th. It was advertised in the Record. It's also advertised in the League of Municipalities publication. This is all driven by legal statute, how you have to have these bids presented to the public, and then they can come to the Borough Hall and pick up the entire bid package. On April 22nd, we had a video conference RFB pre-meeting, just meaning that it's before the time that the bids are due. And we did have several attendees from different companies that had picked up the bid packets, and they had some questions which we took down, and we have prepared and then also have to publish by statute an addendum of a response. And just to share, what one of those were, we had asked for a 10-year timeline on rate increases. And we were asked whether, that felt a little onerous. And so would we be willing to look at something shorter? And so the decision that was made by the Water Committee and our consultants was to allow potential bidders to provide both a 10-year and a 5-year, and that the assessment of the highest responsible bidder could be looked at then in 2 different lights. So that's just, one of the examples of the questions that may be asked. And all the time, again, by statute, anything that they're asking us, we don't necessarily have to respond. But if we do, we have to make sure that all of the individuals, the companies and individuals that have registered to pick up the bids are alerted. So we keep everybody on a level playing field. On May 2nd, we had the first of what is an opportunity for any of the companies that have picked up the RFBs to be able to take a tour of the facilities so they can come and look at the, the ground level 1,000,000-gallon water tank off of Fairhaven. They can go and look at the Ramsey elevated tank, come to each of the water treatment facilities that we have, and spend some time looking at our actual facilities. And May 21st is a Friday. That's when the actual RFPs are due to us. So we'll be interested to, see what comes through. To make sure that I shared with, the community as a whole that during May and June, we will be having an analysis looking at the highest responsible bidder, evaluating that, making sure that all of the components of the bids that we have asked for are included. And it's a lot of information. So just because I may not have a public meeting on May 23rd saying, hey, this is the best bid, it's because it will take some time to ensure that all of the paperwork that any of the bidders have submitted is all in order and is appropriate. And then the financial calculations as to who actually is the highest responsible bidder. If we receive a reasonable offer, so there is a reason, what the water committee considers to be a reasonable offer. The next steps here would be during June and July, we would finalize the purchase agreement with this highest responsible bidder. We would be presenting it to the mayor and council. That's something that's obviously done publicly. So, certainly we'd want to have as many residents attend these meetings as possible. Pending that then the mayor and council feel that this is an offer that also should move forward, in August, September, and October of this year, we would be holding public meetings / public hearings, and we would be then putting in the actual submission of the question of passing a reasonable offer at the public referendum at the general election. And I want to say the public meetings are something that certainly I think anybody who's been along in this process knows that it's really important to myself personally and everybody on the council and the mayor and our entire team that the public is really included and is as educated as possible with all the pieces of the puzzle, so that in November, if all this looks reasonable, that it would be a question, it would be a referendum question on, when you go into the voting box, that you would be voting yes or no to actually selling the system. Again, only if there is a reasonable offer. So the decision to sell Allendale's water system really is not mine, and it's not the water committee's. It really, if there is something that is reasonable, it will be put to the public for that decision to be made. And so that's I wanted to make sure today that really is the update on where we are. So with that, I wanted to move into some of the Q&A questions and answers that were sent to me after the third presentation, which we did talk, more about what the different types of the two different ways to sell the system, kind of the pros and cons of keeping the system, the pros and cons of going down all these different avenues. So I won't rehash that, but I do encourage you to look at presentation number 3 if you have not had the opportunity. So I'm going to read these questions and share with you sort of the best answer that I'm able to pull together at this point. And let me get started. So one of the questions was, can a sale to a new operator include an escape clause that would allow us to reverse the decision? And the answer is, although there are, opportunities for prior to the closing date for the borough to terminate the request for the bid process. So at any time, if we get, 6 bids and we don't like any of them, we don't have to accept any of them. There's no obligation there. The closing date will only take place after the referendum was passed by the Allendale voters. So, there would have to be there would be a question, again, during the general election, yes or no to sell the system, and all of the information would be out there already. So, and certainly we intend to share all the detailed information. After that, it would be considered a sale after the closing. So hopefully that answers that question. The second question was, you mentioned legal expertise we have brought in to help with this decision. Are there experts in the field of municipal engineering, specifically water systems, that we have engaged? And I'll share with everybody that I feel confident that we have put together a very good team, and we also have pulled in different consultants along the way. You never feel like you have, at least I think a person in my position, because I'm not a water engineer, you never feel like you have all of the information you want. But Mike Vreeland, who is our borough engineer from Van Cleef Engineering, he works with our town, he works with other municipalities. He's been involved in several proposed sales. West Milford, that actually did sell their water system. Sussex Borough did not. They ended up going to a referendum, and that referendum was not passed. But certainly he's well educated on our water system. I've been on the council in my 7th year, and he's been our engineer working with us on, along with Suez, on the water system the entire way. So he is an excellent resource. Mott McDonald is a engineering company that specializes in many aspects of water, and they worked with our team on the PFAS feasibility study. And I have also reached out on general questions. We also talked to other as we're going through getting the PFAS feasibility professional bid out for the design implementation study. I've talked to and I've attended a lot of seminars with many other engineering companies, which has been very helpful. Ryan Skirbo, who is a partner at Decoitis, Fitzpatrick, Cole, and Giblin, he specializes in utility law with a concentration in municipal water and sewer utilities. So he currently represents other municipal utilities, as well as municipal utility authorities in the state. So he's got an excellent background in all of this, and really has been so helpful in making sure that we've dotted the I's and crossed the T's just in our process. He's currently representing Boundbrook, which is in the process of a sale of its wastewater system too. Dennis Enright is from Northwest Financial, and he is a financial expert with experience in the valuation of water and sewer systems. He has conducted a valuation that's still in the draft phase with our system, and that's something that won't be released until after we have the bids in on May 21st. So, but it's something that we can kind of bounce back and forth at to see, where things come out. Obviously, the market, defines real market value. So I think we've really put together a great team of people. And I'm hopeful that the residents also feel the same way, that we've shown that we are dedicated and certainly not afraid to ask for extra help. Ray Wiss, our regular borough attorney, has also been intimately involved, and he is very knowledgeable and works across other municipalities in New Jersey. As I'd spoken before, Lane Simon has worked in water as long as he's been on the DPW, and he has been excellent. And Ron Kistner also, they have a lot of experience in many different municipalities. So I feel good about our team. let's see, the next question, I was trying to make some of them go in order to sort of build to things. It said, one of the questions, and then this is important. It said, you mentioned we chose to shut down our water department 8 years ago to keep taxes low. And it goes into another question, which I'll answer later. And I just wanted to make sure that I clarified that water is not part of our taxes. None of your tax dollars goes to the water system. The water system is a separate budget from our, our regular municipal budget. So it is funded by the fees that we pay for our water bills. And I was not on the council at the time, but certainly I understood and supported it, that it really, it was the cost of all of the increased testing and the cost of retaining the number of water employees, which therefore is benefits, and it's all sorts of equipment that's needed to be done. And the testing is even getting more technical, and that's why Suez has been a great partner. As there's thousands of tests that are done every year to ensure that our water is at or above acceptable drinking water standards. And that is something that not only is expensive, but it also is expertise that, there is a limited number of water operators at every single licensing number. So that was the reason why we had, or why the determination was made to go to an operations and management agreement with Suez. And then that led also to your presentation implies that this has created a gap that others have to fill, including yourself. Who's supposed to be doing these jobs that were eliminated? Suez, are they fulfilling their contract? And I think I'd answer that in saying that, water management is incredibly complicated and is only getting more and more complicated. And really, Jeff Pickenich, who's our water operator with Suez, has been an excellent partner. And he and Lane and Ron, they work together. It feels like sometimes it's daily. I mean, he's always managing things daily, but he has to pull Ron and Lane in, because since we own the system, ultimately any expenditures for repairs, extra things that might be, well, maybe we want to put on a new chlorine measurement system so that we can remotely look at what the chlorine levels are at every moment, as opposed to checking it once an hour. We can have it running on a continual basis. So there's just a lot of components. And then as far as, the testing, from my perspective, if it's owned by us and it's our responsibility, like, we are the people that are responsible for having to look forward. So these PFAS contaminants are not currently part of, well, I shouldn't say that. Now in 2021, we have PFNA, PFOS, and PFOA that are being tested, but initially they were not. So whose responsibility is it for us to get prepared? And that's not really part of the Suez contract. But since we own the system, we need to get prepared, or the regulations go into place. Yes, Suez will be testing for them for us, and they were helping us test beforehand, but they're not going to be the people that choose what type of treatment system we're going to be putting into place. So it's when we own the system, we own the responsibility, and therefore we absolutely have to have manpower that is on top of it, because ultimately it's ours. I read off of my script, so let me see whether I said that. Suez does a lot of things. And I just basically said, we're responsible to prepare for the future, or, we will ultimately, pay the price of not being prepared. The next question was, do we have an option to hire a single employee, or maybe shared services with another local town to pick up the gap you and others are covering? And I said, we are right now, but it's a lot. We pull Lane away from DPW work. which puts more strain on the DPW team that already is a lean and mean team. So we pull them away. And, I am 100% volunteer. I love this, but in the long term, I wouldn't expect somebody that at some point would be, the chairperson of water and sewer to be as intimately involved and spend the same amount of time that I do on it. So, if we decide to continue to retain ownership of the system, I think that the the residents of the borough would need to be prepared that we would need to be filling these types of positions, which will be an extra financial responsibility. Um, but right, while we're in the position we're in, I'm just so grateful that, we have the water team that we do, and that Ron and Lane have, stepped up, and everybody on our team has really stepped up. See, next question. I bet you're wondering how many there are. There's not that many more, but the next question is, I assume we are not about to become the first community to sell off its water system to a private for-profit operator. Is there data about how common this is and whether it's rising or falling? And the answer I feel comfortable saying is ever increasing regulatory requirements, aging infrastructure, and stagnant growth in the customer base, meaning that we're not adding, more customers. And actually in Allendale, we also continue to have to buy more water because we only pump 50% of our water, are causing, but those things of the increasing regulatory requirements and the aging infrastructure, those two things alone in New Jersey in particular, any, of our communities that are much older, they are forcing a lot of municipalities to kind of face the music that they have pipes that are 100 years old, and they have systems that are in spaces even that are smaller than adding extra treatment protocols. How do you do that? And so they are needing to consider sale options. And there are several legal processes that municipalities can utilize to explore selling their systems. And I did go over those in that last presentation. The traditional referendum process, which is the one that Allendale is currently exploring, places that final decision in the hands of the residents by a referendum. And I think that's really important. The other process that we talked about, that you can get approval from the NJDEP, Department of Environmental Protection, and the Board of Public Utilities. And this second process was made possible by the Water Infrastructure Protection Act, and it's called WIPA, and Christie put it into place in 2015. And that was because some systems are distressed enough that they just can't monitor it. They can't handle the economic part of it. We did not feel Allendale was in that position where we would qualify for a distressed. And that one, you do not, a governing body does not need to go to referendum. And WIPA is currently being used. And if you Google these, you can see the Egg Harbor Township sale, Salem City, West Milford, and Long Hill that I talked about earlier successfully completed a WIPA transaction. And for me, somebody that did contracts before, the beautiful part is that WIPA allows you to negotiate, but it also means you have to prove and say your system's distressed, versus the RFP is great because it ultimately is a referendum for the voters, but it's a bid process. So it doesn't really allow for the negotiation with the possible bidder. So that's what we are in. And the Borough of Bound Brook is currently undertaking the referendum process. And I did also just, as far as other towns, Upper Saddle River, Franklin Lakes, Saddle River, they have many of their residents that have their own well water. Those that do not have their own well water currently hook up with Suez. So, there's plenty of places. Hasbrook Heights uses Suez. There's plenty of places that have, just in our general area, that have Suez. American Water is also a presence. So, as far as the trend, going up in the last few years. There are, like we said, examples of WIPA being put into place, WIPA failing. Sussex Borough is an example of a referendum failing. And obviously 10 years ago, people that were around here, Ramsey went to sell their water and sewer system. And, they many people really thought it was the way to go, but the voters did not feel that so inclined, and it was voted down. And they've spent, I believe it's about $9 million on upgrading different infrastructure that they've had. So, that said, the governing body and our borough team believes that it really is in the best interest of Allendale that we gather all the information that we can, including going out for bid, and that we make a planned decision on how we're going to move forward for Allendale Water. And I think one of the things I'd implore is that we need to not just think about, today or next year, but we need to think about, what's best for the town 5 years from now, what's best just for 10, 15, 20. So those are the things that, we're trying to explore. And I tried to really give as much information as possible in the previous meetings. All right, question number 7, and I think this is the last one, but it says and it kind of was a related, it says, what's the next PFAS? And PFAS, if you remember, is the PFNA, PFOS, and PFOA. Currently, Allendale is meeting the standards. They're running annual averages as a running annual average, but we're close. And we're talking about these contaminants in parts per trillion. They're very, very small. There are communities that, after they went into effect in Q1, have already had to shut down wells, start sending out letters. And we are not one, but we need to plan ahead. So what's the next PFAS? And I had talked about this in the last meeting, and it's 1,4-dioxane. And we have already started testing for that. And currently it's not a concern for us. And that is good, because part of another question was, are the treatments different? And yes, the treatment for 1,4-dioxane is different. It's a combination of peroxide and UV light. So it's a different treatment system than what I talked about in the last meeting of using granular activated carbon. And granular activated carbon, and that was another question, is a good treatment because it does manage several contaminants. And in fact, that's one that we would actually be able to remove a component, these air strippers, and we would use the granular activated carbon to be able to ensure that the stripper components would actually, in one way, it would make our treatment simpler, which is good. But granular activated carbon, does treat a multitude of things. And one of the other questions, was they said, what's the next ones after that? And what's called the UCMR, which is Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring System, I think is what it stands for. That was released in March. And from what I can see, there are 29, what it is every 5 years, the EPA is tasked with releasing 30 new contaminants that will begin to be, information will begin to be collected on. And 29 of them are these PFAS, are from the PFAS family. So I talked about the PFNA, PFOS, PFOA, and the other, so 29 of them are from there. So most of these are smaller chains. These are these long fluorinated carbon chains. They call them forever chemicals. And they are from your pots and pans, the Teflons, the non-stick carpeting, the, water repellent, everything that people wanted to have, firefighting foam. So those are where these PFAS contaminants came from. And in one of the presentations, I showed how they trickle down. And again, they're being measured in parts per trillion, 1 grain of sand in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And we're in a good place, I think, so far, but, everybody needs to plan ahead. So I believe those are going to be the future ones. And, we just have to keep our eyes open what the NJDEP brings forward. could that be a little bit different? It could. We are in constant communication with the NJDEP. I've set up multiple meetings with NJDEP. I coordinated a Northern Bergen County elected officials and some other individuals that we met with the NJDEP. So I think we're really trying to do our best to stay on top of things. So, ooh, that was 36 minutes. That's a lot of talking. I'm going to ask if anybody has any questions. I think you can unmute yourselves and maybe you can wave to me and any of my fellow council people. Ah, yes, I see you, Andre. Yes. What's your question?
Hi, hi, Liz. Andre Kirilak. Thank you for your service and what a fabulous presentation.
Oh,
So I have three questions and they're very short.
okay.
And they could be answered this evening or they may not need to be answered this evening. The first question is, I saw the RFP letter on the website, the water department. Are the bid specs public information and where can we find them if they are?
Okay. Gosh, I wish I had legal counsel with me. I'm going to say that yes, they are public information. And
Can they be posted? That's all.
so
Okay.
can they be posted? The reason why they're not posted, quite honestly, because they are a packet of information and a jump drive of information. So when somebody comes to pick up the bid, they get a bid package of paperwork of all the forms and all those things like that. And they get a jump drive of information of which all of that is public information. Like there's nothing that's in there that's not public information. So you could go to the Borough Hall and ask for a copy and get
If
a copy.
possible, if that could be posted, that would be a nicety.
Okay.
Not a necessity.
Okay.
I did contracts for most of my career, so I would be just interested in looking at that.
Okay.
The second question is the water testing. Where is it done? Is it done at the sources or is it done at the town level? And if it's done at the town level and there is contaminated water, my question would be, why are we buying contaminated water?
Okay. So, in one of the presentations I actually gave, there's a link to, like, first of all, on our website, we have a report that shows all of our testing that's published on a yearly basis.
Mhm.
There is actually NJ Water Watch you can go in and put in Allendale and it will show you all of the contaminants that are tested for. And it might be a little complicated, but you're a smart guy, you can see it'll tell you some of them are tested in the water itself. Some of them are tested, in the water, meaning in the wells. Some of them are tested at what's called the point of entry. So which is most important is when it's going into our water system and coming to us. And if there are any times where the maximum contaminant level is over, there is a notification that has to be sent out to the residents. So different chemicals have to be tested at different times. So, like if we show, like even these PFAS chemicals, if you show for a period of time that you have non-detect, right now they're tested every single quarter at the point of entry. And if for 2 consecutive years, I think it is, I'm guessing that you have non-detect for 2 consecutive years, you then can go to an annual testing. So every chemical is different. And in one of the presentations, I gave, there's thousands of tests. And so the ones for our water are tested at our point of entries. So at Meeker Street, at New Street, and at West
in town.
In town, yes.
Okay.
And then we do buy 50% of our water from Suez. So those tests are done on the Suez water. And again, if any of those, and if you do remember, and I don't like to think about it, but that we did have one where one of the strippers wasn't working. And again, it was below what the EPA standards allow, but we had to send out letters. And even though it was one time, we had to send out letters for a full year. So, that's the testing. Hope that answered your question.
Okay, it does. And the last question, I'm sorry to take all this time. What
No,
is
I'm
the-
sure
what
everybody
is the-
wants to hear,
What is the state's responsibility, the state of New Jersey to the municipalities?
Uh,
Whether we decide to keep it as a community, okay, that still needs to be determined, or whether we do something else with it. What is the state of New Jersey's responsibility to ensure that, or to help us ensure that we have safe drinking water for our residents?
so the state's responsibility really comes through the NJDEP. And they, have added um, many more requirements. And New Jersey is one of the most progressive states in putting together new regulations. So, the PFAS chemicals, many states don't have those regulations yet. New Jersey, New York, California, they are very aggressive. The Water Quality Accountability Act, that we have to send in all this reporting on everything. I mean, miles of pipe, and you have to make sure you exercise your valves once a year. You have to certify that all of these things are in working order and that you have a plan moving forward. So the state's arm of enforcing quality water is through the NJDEP. I thought you might ask, and one of my challenge, or maybe I could transition it to, I am frustrated as a elected official and as a resident that I'm so glad we have these PFAS standards, because I don't want to go to some other town and find out that, we might be in regulation, but I'm drinking, well, before we had water fountains, but out of it, and they're at, 80 parts per trillion.
Mm.
And the problem is that it's expensive to put in this treatment. And I wish that there was a better funding mechanism, because it's incredible. And this is what crushes municipalities like ours, where we need to be replacing pipes in the streets because we don't want to have pipes breaking, because then we're wasting water. But then we, have to pay $750,000 to put in a new pipe, but we have to spend $3 million to put in, make sure our treatment is at the level that we want it. And it's happening all over the state. So it's a challenge. It is. But I think that the quality part, I feel that the NJDEP is trying to do their best to ensure that the regulations are there, and they are on it.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. And the last one has nothing to do with the water situation. It has to do with our Mayor, Mr. Bernstein. Mayor Bernstein, I hope you'll be ending this meeting with a joke.
Oh, all right. Anybody else have any questions?
Liz, I have a question.
Hi, Laura.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm fine. Does the arrangement have to be a sale? Can it be a lease?
So it can be a lease. And actually, we talked about that in presentation number 3. And the reason why at this time we as a team felt that going for the long-term lease was not the best plan is because these leases are, 30, well, even if they were 10, 15, 30, 40 years, at the end of that lease, so you lose the value of actually selling the system, but you basically are giving over your rate structure at the same time. And in 10, 20, 30 years, you have nobody in town that knows anything about how to run the facility. And so you don't have employees to cover it. So it's kind of like you're kicking the can down. You're kicking the can down the road to a place where you basically have to sell the system at the end, and you lose the opportunity to generate value, because any money above and beyond what we pay in our, because we do have water debt from capital work that we had done, like the restoration of the Ramsey elevated tank and other things. You lose the ability to get the monetary value. So that was why we, had decided that a long-term lease was not the way to go.
Well, one aspect of leases is you can put due diligence terms into it. Can you put due diligence terms into the sale?
Like, give me an example of what you mean.
Like, for example, building 50% of the infrastructure, or, replacing a certain amount of tanks by a certain time, or things like that.
Yeah. So there are parameters that are in the RFB that they must put in a minimum amount of money into capital infrastructure projects. We did not define what those projects would have to be, because obviously for them, the more efficient a system is, the more money. They don't make money if they're losing money, water to leaking either. So there are a number of requirements that are in the RFB that has gone out. So it's the same. I don't think the lease would have been any different in the requirements that we would have had, just that it would be a lease that at some point would revert back to the borough of Allendale.
With the purchase that we have from Suez right now, 50%, do they pay any infrastructure costs?
They do not. Well, let me answer that differently. We have two contracts with Suez. We have an operations and management agreement with Suez, and that does have a part of it that covers like the first couple of digs that we have, like $5,000 worth of digs. So there's like a pot of money that's in that, $690,000 contract that goes to digs when we have water main breaks or curb box problems. And then we have a separate bulk purchase agreement that we utilize from Suez. So we buy 50% of our water, and it's actually a genius structure that retired Councilwoman Jacqueline McSwiggan and the team that she had then was able to negotiate, where we actually don't have to buy the same amount of water every single month, that we do have larger volumes of water in the summertime, and we can have smaller amounts of water during the months when actually we can cover our from our wells, our draw. But the summer months are, it's crazy how many millions of gallons we use. But so hopefully that answered your question.
Thanks.
Sure. Anyone else?
So this is Arcadius. This is my first meeting, but I'll catch up on other links. So two questions, and they don't have to be answered now. But the first question is, how did the other municipalities work out when they actually sold it? So can we sold their water, basically resources and systems? So did over time, is there a way to look it up? Did their rates go up? Because in the end, when we sell it, whoever is buying it, right, they are not charity. They either do it for profit, right? And usually it's for profit. So they have to recoup the money somehow. So either, let's say, less investment into the infrastructure, or maybe selling their own water and shutting down the local wells, which in the end, it doesn't matter for the end customer. But how did the rates go? Did they go up? Did they go down? And also the ones that didn't sell, like Ramsey, right? You mentioned, how did they, I know they had, like you mentioned, a huge capital expense initially, but how was it faring now? And if you don't have the answer now, that's fine, but that's one question.
So, I do want to I feel like I want to give you a little bit of response, and, it's never easy. Like, nothing is apples to apples. Every system's different. Ramsey has an entire water department. So they have their own water, a level 2 water operator. They have purchased all of the equipment that they need to service their water system. They had spent, like I said, the $9 million was to spend in order to replace one of their treatment facilities because, and this, I don't want to say this in a scary way, because naturally occurring arsenic is in different parts, just because that's a naturally made byproduct of some of the ground structure. And so they had to do all those upgrades. So how did they fare? I mean, I think that it's cost a lot of money. Their rates are higher than ours are. They also, though, have to still buy 50% of their water from Suez, which is a challenge. If our wells provided enough water that the water that we drew from the ground was free, that might be a little bit different. But when you're paying for 50% of the water already, it becomes a little bit more challenging. And the fact of the matter is that these larger companies, every time that work needs to be done, it can be done in a less expensive manner than what we can do it, because we're small. And it's hard to say how does every municipality fare. I mean, if we decide to continue to retain our water system, certainly our rates are going to go up and our infrastructure costs are going to go up. And that's not bad. It's just, and that's the reason why we wanted to be having these discussions with our community, is we just want to make sure that people aren't like, hey, wait a minute, what's going on? I didn't know any of this. This is crazy. That water is a commodity that for far too long, most everyone took for granted. And we should have been charging much, much more earlier in order to do some replacements, if that's the hindsight. And everywhere in this country is, unless it's a new development, is facing the same challenges. And if we keep the system, we will see rate increases, but we'll know, why we're doing it. If we sell the system, the idea would be that we would have a set rate structure for a period of 5 years or 10 years. And then the rates, these companies cannot just go out and say, hey, I'm going to give a 40% increase to Allendale next month. They have to go through the BPU, the Bureau of Public Utilities, and they have to petition to the BPU for all of their price increases exactly the same way that PSE&G, Rockland Electric, and those other public utilities have to do. So, the BPU is kind of the watchdog. I've reached out and talked to the BPU, trying to, pick as much information as I can. And, they definitely try to do their best too. So it's not like these utilities can just raise prices without having any check. Does that help you a little bit?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it basically says that it depends, right?
I know. And I'm also going to say, even myself, I'm a Googler, and I think what you see when you Google, water system sales, is you're going to see more of the times where people are unhappy. Nobody really likes to write an article and say, hey, I've lived in Upper Saddle River and I've had Suez water because I don't have my own well and I'm super happy with it. It's not an article that anybody writes. But you can find the things that kind of you say, oh, okay, let me be concerned about this. And I think that's why, we tried to make sure in the RFB that we were asking, we want to understand what is their plan for treating for PFAS. We want to have that as part of their response to us. And they
So
obviously have to have run systems in New Jersey, systems that are as large or larger than Allendale, all those types of things.
maybe additional question that just I realized based on what you were saying, how much roughly, right? And not really cost wise, but percentage wise, when we buy from Suez, is this water cheaper than our water, or is our water actually cheaper? And is it like 50% cheaper, or we're back neck and neck, and then it really doesn't matter, because then you're running your own system at the same cost, which would be probably easier just to buy it. And you don't have to answer this question now. I know it's a.
Well, I'm going to answer it simply and say our water is free when we pull it out of the ground. The problem is that we only have the capacity to pull out 50%. It's not like we can pull out more. So our water,
but I was thinking if you're working pro bono, but if there was actually somebody that would have to work and to maintain what we have, in addition to the 2 or 3 other individuals that you mentioned, their work is not free, right? But you're saying in essence these costs are very low comparing to the value of water that we're drawing from our sources.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I totally understand your question, and I'm not sure I'm answering it correctly. I just know that at this point, the limits that we have on each of our wells only allow us to pull so much water. Obviously, from the expense side, we have to maintain our treatment facilities at each of these sites. So that is, money that only goes to the water that we're pumping out. And we have an operations and management agreement with Suez that they primarily do that for us. And the water that comes from Suez, there's an interconnect, and it's in the first presentation, actually shows you where the interconnect is. That water still travels in our pipes. So, we have to pay to maintain those pipes, make sure that, we're not losing water, because sadly, and we're not as bad as some towns, but we have unaccounted for water that's anywhere between 17 and 19%. Now that happens when, we have a fire or there's a water leak. So it's unaccounted for water. So that's both Suez water and our water. But the Suez water, we have to buy it, by the thousands of gallons on an annual basis. And it's about $500,000 that we spend on water from Suez. So that's $500,000 that we don't have to spend on our own system.
And so my question is, I know that, when I get a bill, I pay for the water. So I can assume, let's say 50% that's Suez and the other is 50% is our water. So that 50% that we all pay, is that $500,000, or is that more, or is that less? So I'm just trying to basically deduce the cost of our water as opposed to Suez, and whether it makes sense to maintain what we have. If it's cheaper, it does. If it's not, I wouldn't, I wouldn't know, or I wouldn't think so.
I mean, either way, you can't get away from the fact we have to spend $500,000 on buying.
No, I understand. Yeah.
And
yeah,
so I think that is part of the question. And that's what we're looking into and seeing what the value is. We know that we spend, an extra, I actually, in the first presentation, so I don't want to pull it out, I actually go through the entire budget. So if you go back to, not the first presentation, if you go back to the second presentation, I actually show the economics of our water budget, because we are a zero-sum game. We don't try to make money on our water. The idea was always that Allendale would try to keep the water rates as low as possible for our residents. That's the reason why we did it. But we do spend $500,000 purchasing water from Suez. We spend, close to $700,000 for operations and management contract. We spend $280,000 on debt payment. So if you go back and look, I think that will help you get a picture as to what the economic spend is.
Okay. So the last question, this was the original second question, and I apologize for monopolizing time. Based on our Allendale's location, and we have somebody who has been in our water, let's call it historian. What's the likelihood? I know it's a tricky question, but just hypothetically, of us actually getting water and more contaminated. And here I'm looking from the perspective of we're not really in an urban area, right? We're pretty high up. I guess maybe that's why the high school is called Northern Highlands. So we're getting the water, let's say, I would say probably cleaner or earlier than, let's say, if we were somewhere down the hill. And is this pollution that we're now sometimes discovering, is this inherent this pollution that has always been there? We're just detecting it sometimes now, or we are actually getting polluted because, let's say, upstream we have some kind of I don't know, garbage dump that I'm unaware of because I'm not that familiar with the area.
To answer it really correctly, I think I'd need to have a environmental scientist. I will say that, our water is really pretty good. I mean, if you go and you look at our consumer confidence reports, you'll see that, we basically have to treat with, chlorine treatment. We do have tetrachloroethylene that needs to be removed with a bubbler in just one of the treatment facilities. So that is something that is simply achieved, and that probably was at some point a local issue that hopefully will decrease over time. But we have non-detect, so it's not, once it goes through the treatment, it's a non-detect level, so that's fine. These new emerging contaminants are you used to measure things in parts per million, then you went to parts per billion, and now this is parts per trillion. And the entire country is facing this, and the numbers that people have, in the Dark Waters book, they're like 400 parts per billion, not parts per trillion. And we range from non-detect with the PFNA in some of the wells to 8 parts per trillion. We have had some numbers as high as 18 parts per trillion, but it's measured on a running annual quarter. So and we don't have like a site by us that we could be having a lawsuit after, but the state does. And that's kind of why I'm like, well, if you're going after some of these companies, you really, it inherently got into the aquifer, or quite honestly, it could be in our water cycle. Like that's what they're finding is, these PFAS components, probably water is one of the lower places where you're even being exposed to it, but we know it's there. So I believe we need to treat it. And we're right on the borderline, and I would not want us to go into violation. And because the numbers, just so you know, are 13 and 14 parts per trillion are the levels that after, and they started being measured in we've historically been measuring them for the past year and a half, but Q1 of 2021 is the first quarter. So some municipalities went into violation because their first reading divided by 4 was higher than 13 for PFOS and PFNA and 14 for PFOA. And so they're already in violation. Like we're not like that, but and I'm we don't have enough data to say, is it cyclical? Like, is there more? But these numbers are small. But to answer your question, we don't know of any site that's contaminating our water, because if we did, that would, we would be on it. Does that help?
Yep, definitely. Thank you very much. And thank you for your service. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for your questions and your interest. I do hope that if you look at the other presentations and you have any questions or ideas, or comments, I would love to hear them. And I know sometimes, and I said, email me right away. I did not post the Q&A like I said I would, because I realized it was too hard, but I did put up the acronyms.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Anybody?
Hi,
One
Liz.
last question. Oh, sorry.
Jim?
Sure. Okay. I just have one question, and pardon my ignorance on this, but in the case of a sale, you mentioned that the water has its own budget. What happens? Is there an actual transfer of dollars? And if so, how does that get applied? And how does that get used or benefit the town or the people of the town?
That's a great question. And I'll answer it simply, is that all my understanding, the first thing that would happen is we would be mandated by law to pay off our water debt, to which, and don't hold me to these numbers, I think it's, well, actually, I don't even want to say what it is. I can't remember, 2-point-something million we have in water debt, capital debt. And then the rest of the monies would go to pay any municipal debt. So, and that is the way. And then after that, I think if there's money left over from that, it goes to surplus maybe, but you'll have to check back with me on that because I don't remember. But yeah, there is a formula that it needs to go. It does benefit all taxpayers. So that's why, and that is why some systems, like if you Google some articles of systems that have sold, some of them, quite honestly, not only was their infrastructure in bad repair, but they were in such debt that they couldn't finance, even finance bonds for repair. And so it behooved them to be able to remove their not only water debt, but municipal debt. Did that help, Jim?
Yes, it did. And one other question is, will we, as taxpayers, be able to see the analysis that you're going to see, which is the comparison or analysis of a sale versus the cost of maintaining what we have? Will that be available?
Yeah, I mean, anything that we have will be certainly is open to the public for sure. The first step that we be taking with Northwest Financial and our group would be identifying the highest responsible bidder, which me really simplifying it. They obviously have to meet all the terms, but it would be a function of what their actual bid price is, compared with what their standard rate structure would be for us for the next 5 to 10 years. So meaning that we gave parameters that they, couldn't increase rates more than 5% in any given year, and an average over that a certain time period could only be 3%. So if somebody, obviously if somebody raises rates in the earlier years, there's a calculation then that even though their bid might be higher, the value to the actual, end user being myself and you and everybody else, it's not quite as valuable, because our rates are going up. So Northwest Financial will help us really look at that. And we will be, that's something that will be part of the presentation. The part about how expensive is it for us if we decide to keep it, that's going to be a little bit more gray, just being honest, in the fact that, you don't know how much it's going to, because it depends upon what we decide to do with keeping the water system. If we keep the water system and we're saying, well, you don't want to have an operations and management contract with Suez anymore, we want to start our own water department, we're going to have to buy all sorts of capital equipment, we're going to have to hire a water operator. If we want to continue our operations and management agreement with Suez, we have the current agreement through 2023. And, I think that that's a positive. So, and certainly that's information that can be illustrated to the public as to what those numbers are. And I encourage you to look beforehand, even at just what our current water structure looks like. our current financials look like, which is two places. It's in a simplified form in the presentation that I gave, the second presentation, but also if you go onto our website under the financial documents, the audits are there. Like there is nothing that this borough council is trying to keep from anybody. And this decision is a big one.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
I have a question, Liz.
Hi, John.
John, hi. When we test our water for PFAS or any other chemical, are we really actually doing two tests? One for the water we source from our own wells and one for the water that is provided by Suez?
Great question. So Suez is mandated for all of the same tests that we are. And the water that we purchase from Suez, so Suez does have some wells in different places, but they actually have what's called surface water versus groundwater. And so they at their Haworth plant. And so that is available also online in the first presentation. I think it was the first presentation that I gave. It gives a link and you can actually look up, but they have absolutely all of the same testing requirements that Allendale has. So all those results are there. So yeah, for all the PFAS, PFOA, everything, they also are responsible for those.
So my question though is, whatever, we haven't hit that 13 or 14 parts per trillion, but we hit some number, 8, 6, whatever it is. Was that water, when we hit that high mark, pumped out of our own wells, or was that the water we procured from Suez?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So Suez, so right now, and actually, I think in the second presentation, I don't remember if I gave Suez's numbers. Surface water is traditionally a little bit, their parts per trillion are smaller. So I don't want to quote what their numbers were, but they were not, their overall running annual averages were less than the one point of entry that we have where they were higher. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But they're not in violation either, but they, the same way that we're looking ahead, they are also, trying to look and say, okay, how would we treat these things? I mean, we all have to be looking at it because honestly, we all have a responsibility to remove any of these chemicals. So yeah.
Okay, and then if we made a decision to sell off our system, our water system, does Suez's role in providing water to us change in any way?
So, obviously everything will have to change. I mean, if they are currently our water operator, if we sell the system, things would change. So, we are going to be having a discussion with Suez prior to the bids being, opened as to just, how that transition would happen. The BPU, I would not believe that the BPU would allow Suez to not provide us water after we have our contract. Our bulk water agreement expires in like 2037, 2032, 2030 something. So is that what you're asking me?
I'm just trying to understand what would be Suez's take on our decision. Is it net to their advantage or disadvantage? And I'm just kind of curious about that.
Yeah, I don't feel I could answer that question. That would be really something that Suez would have to answer.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? We're having such fun talking about water. All right. Well, I guess seeing that nobody else is waving their hands or jumping out and saying we love water, I will say thank you so much to everybody for attending. I hope it has been helpful and informative. If you do have other questions, it really does help me to get your questions because, you know, it helps me know what people want to know. And so thank you, and keep talking about water. And I feel like the, you know, the right thing is going to surface for all of us if we keep, you know, learning and questioning and understanding. And once we see what these bids look like, you know, we'll have another piece to the puzzle. So thanks so much.
Yeah.
Great job, Liz. Thank you very much.
Hey,
Yeah.
Liz, sorry, can I
Thanks,
ask one more
Liz.
question?
Thanks, Liz.
Bye.
Thanks, Liz.